In the untamed wilderness of 1880s Arizona territory, a desperate letter and a promise of a new life brought Abigail Montgomery across an ocean and half a continent. What awaited her wasn't the husband she'd been corresponding with for months, but a freshly dug grave and a town full of secrets. Alone in a strange land, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a handful of letters from a dead man, Abigail's fate seemed sealed, until a mysterious half-Apache rancher named Ethan Blackwood stepped from the shadows offering protection. But in a land where fortunes were made and lost on a single gunshot, and where the line between justice and vengeance was thin as paper, Abigail would soon discover that Ethan's help came with dangers of its own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of a woman who traveled to the edge of civilization seeking a husband, only to find herself caught in a deadly web of deceit, murder, and unexpected love. The stagecoach rattled violently as it hit another deep rut in the dusty road. Abigail Montgomery clutched her weathered leather satchel tighter against her chest and braced herself against the wooden seat. The journey from Boston had been grueling enough, but these final miles through Arizona territory were proving the most punishing. "First time out west, ma'am." The man sitting across from her had a friendly face, weathered by sun and wind, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. "Is it that obvious?" Abigail adjusted her hat, now sadly crushed from the long journey. "Most folks who've lived here a while know to wear clothes that don't show the dust so much," he said with a gentle laugh, nodding at her once fine blue traveling dress. She looked down at herself and sighed. The dress had been pristine when she'd boarded the train in Boston 3 weeks ago. Now it was coated with a fine layer of reddish-brown dust, the hem frayed and dirty. "I suppose I have a lot to learn," she admitted. The truth was, she had barely given a thought to practical matters like appropriate clothing when she had packed her trunks. Her mind had been filled with romantic notions of reuniting with Thomas Wheeler, the man whose letters had captivated her for the past 8 months. A successful cattle rancher with a growing operation outside a town called Copper Ridge. Thomas had placed an advertisement in an eastern newspaper seeking a bride. His letters had been eloquent, thoughtful, and increasingly affectionate. At 32 years old, Abigail had resigned herself to spinsterhood. The war had taken so many young men, and her position as a schoolteacher in Boston offered security but little opportunity for romance. Thomas's letters had awakened something in her that she thought had died long ago, hope for a family of her own. The stagecoach began to slow, pulling Abigail from her thoughts. "Copper Ridge, folks," the driver called down. "We'll be stopping at Dawson's General Store." Abigail's heart quickened. After months of correspondence and weeks of travel, she was finally here. She smoothed her dress as best she could and checked that her hair was still somewhat presentable under her hat. The stagecoach came to a stop in a cloud of dust, and the driver opened the door. "Watch your step now," he said, offering his hand. Abigail stepped down onto the main street of Copper Ridge and looked around at what was to be her new home. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a bank, and various other businesses. Nothing like the bustling streets of Boston, but there was a certain charm to it. "Miss Montgomery?" A tall, balding man in a black suit approached her. He had kind eyes, but a somber expression that immediately sent a chill through her. "Yes, that's me," she replied, extending her hand. "I'm Harold Dawson, owner of the general store and postmaster. He took off his hat and held it in his hands. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to slow around her. "What is it, Mr. Dawson? Is Thomas all right?" The man's eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm very sorry to tell you this, but Mr. Wheeler passed away 3 days ago. Influenza took him quick. We buried him yesterday." Abigail felt as though the ground had fallen away beneath her feet. She swayed slightly, and Mr. Dawson reached out to steady her. "I'm sorry, miss. If we'd known you were already on your way, there just wasn't time to send a word." 3 days, she whispered. "Just 3 days." If her journey had been slightly faster, if the train hadn't been delayed in St. Louis. "Do you have family back east you can return to?" Mr. Dawson asked gently. The question brought the reality of her situation crashing down. Her teaching position had been filled. She had sold most of her possessions to finance this journey. Her parents were long dead, and her only brother had moved to California years ago, communication between them sporadic at best. "No," she said quietly, "there's nothing for me to go back to." Mr. Dawson looked uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure we can arrange for you to stay at the boarding house for a few days while you decide what to do. Mrs. Parker is a kind woman, though her rates are—" "I can pay," Abigail said quickly, though she knew her funds were limited. She had expected to step into a marriage and a home, not to be stranded in a strange town. "There's also the matter of Mr. Wheeler's property," Mr. Dawson continued. "His ranch, the cattle. I'm afraid there are some complications." "Complications?" Abigail asked. Before Mr. Dawson could elaborate, a commotion from the saloon across the street drew their attention. The swinging doors burst open, and a large man with a wild beard stumbled out, followed by another man who was shouting angrily. "You think you can just take Wheeler's land now that he's dead?" the second man yelled. "The bank has the first claim, Farley, and don't you forget it." "That land was promised to me," the bearded man snarled back. "Wheeler knew he owed me." "Mr. Dawson shook his head. "I apologize for this display, Miss Montgomery. Thomas Wheeler's death has stirred up some conflicts of interest in our town." "I don't understand," Abigail said. "What's happening?" Mr. Dawson sighed. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." He led her into the general store, a large, well-stocked establishment with shelves of canned goods, tools, fabrics, and other necessities. At the back was a small office where he offered her a seat. "Tea?" he asked, and she nodded gratefully. While he prepared it, Abigail tried to collect her thoughts. Thomas was dead. Her plans, her dreams, her future, all vanished in an instant. And now there seemed to be some dispute over his property. Mr. Dawson returned with 2 cups of tea and sat across from her. "Miss Montgomery, Thomas Wheeler was well liked in Copper Ridge, but his business dealings were complicated. He borrowed heavily from the bank to expand his cattle operation last year. Then we had a drought, and he lost a good portion of his herd. He never mentioned any financial troubles in his letters," Abigail said. "Men don't like to worry their womenfolk with such matters," Mr. Dawson replied. "The point is, with his passing, there are several parties who believe they have claim to his ranch. The bank holds the mortgage. Farley Jenkins, the bearded fellow you saw, claims Thomas promised him land in exchange for help during the drought, and there are others." "But what about me?" Abigail asked. "Surely as his intended wife I have some claim." Mr. Dawson looked uncomfortable. "Without a formal marriage having taken place, I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize your position as having any legal standing, unless Mr. Wheeler left a will naming you specifically." "I see." Abigail's voice was small. "I'm truly sorry," Mr. Dawson said. "If you need employment while you decide what to do, my wife could use help in the store. It's not much, but it would provide you with some income." The offer was kind, but the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She had left everything behind for a new life that had evaporated before she even arrived. "I appreciate that, Mr. Dawson. I may take you up on it." She rose from her chair. "For now, I think I should get settled at the boarding house." Mr. Dawson nodded. "Of course, I'll have your trunks delivered there. Mrs. Parker's place is just down the street, the white house with the blue shutters." As Abigail left the general store, The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty street. The town seemed different now, no longer the setting of her hopeful new beginning, but a strange and potentially hostile place where she had no ties, no protection. She was halfway to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw a lone rider approaching slowly. His dark hair was long, tied back at the nape of his neck, and his skin was deeply tanned. He sat tall in the saddle of a magnificent black horse, his posture speaking of confidence and strength. As he drew closer, Abigail could see his features more clearly: high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes so dark they appeared almost black. There was something in those eyes, a wariness, a hardness, that made her instinctively step back. The rider stopped his horse a few feet from her. "Miss Montgomery?" His voice was deep and quiet. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Yes," she replied, surprised. "How do you know my name?" "This is a small town," he said, simply. "News travels fast." He dismounted in one fluid motion and tipped his hat. "Ethan Blackwood." "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I don't believe Thomas mentioned you in his letters." A shadow crossed the man's face. "Thomas Wheeler and I weren't exactly friends, but we had an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Ethan Blackwood glanced around as if checking who might be listening. "The kind that makes me think you might be in danger, now that he's gone." Abigail's breath caught. "Danger? From whom?" "There are men in this town who would kill for Wheeler's land. Some of them already think they have a claim to it." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Wheeler died suddenly. Too suddenly, Mr. Dawson said it was influenza," Abigail said, "but a chill ran through her nonetheless, did he?" Ethan's expression was unreadable. "Wheeler was as healthy as a horse last time I saw him, just a week ago." Abigail didn't know what to make of this stranger and his insinuations. "Why are you telling me this, Mr. Blackwood? We've only just met." "Because Thomas Wheeler sent me a letter the day before he died," Ethan said. "He asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him. Said you were coming west to be his bride, and that he feared he'd made enemies who might not want to see the two of you happy." "Why would he ask you if you weren't friends?" Ethan's mouth quivered in what might have been a smile. "My ranch borders his to the south. I'm half Apache. People in town don't always take kindly to men like me. Wheeler was one of the few who treated me fair. We helped each other out from time to time." Abigail studied him. There was indeed a hardness to him, but also something else, a sense of honor, perhaps. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Blackwood?" "I'm suggesting that you be careful who you trust in Copper Ridge, and I'm offering you protection if you want it." "Protection?" Abigail repeated. "My ranch house has plenty of room. You'd be safer there than at the boarding house in town. At least until we figure out what really happened to Wheeler and what it means for you." Abigail was taken aback. "Mr. Blackwood, I barely know you. It wouldn't be proper for me to stay at your home. My housekeeper, Mrs. Redfeather, lives on the property. Your reputation would be safe." He shrugged. "But it's your choice. I'm just keeping a promise to a man who asked for my help." Before Abigail could respond, a shout from down the street caught their attention. It was Farley Jenkins, the bearded man from earlier, and he was striding toward them with purpose, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "Blackwood!" he bellowed. "What are you doing talking to Wheeler's woman?" Ethan stepped slightly in front of Abigail, his posture relaxed but alert. "Just being neighborly, Jenkins. Something you might try sometime." Jenkins sneered. "We don't need your kind of neighborliness around here. The lady doesn't need an Indian showing her around." He turned to Abigail. "Miss, you should know that. Wheeler's ranch is likely to be mine soon enough. The bank might hold the papers, but I hold the water rights to the creek that runs through that property. Without water, that land ain't worth spit. Is that why you were so interested in buying it from him while he was alive? Ethan asked coolly. Strange how you suddenly claim to it now that he's dead. Jenkins' face reddened. You watch your mouth, you half-breed. Or what? Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. For a tense moment the two men stared at each other. Then Jenkins spat on the ground and turned back to Abigail. You'd do well to stay away from this one, miss. He's in trouble. And if you're thinking you have any claim to Wheeler's property, think again. He died owing debts all over this county. With that, Jenkins stormed off toward the saloon. Abigail's heart was racing. The confrontation had been brief but intense, and it confirmed that there was more happening in Copper Ridge than a simple case of influenza. Do you see what I mean? Ethan asked quietly. There's something not right about Wheeler's death, and you're caught in the middle of it without even knowing the players. Abigail took a deep breath. What would you suggest I do, Mr. Blackwood? Come to my ranch, just for a few days, until we can figure out what's really going on. If you decide you want to leave after that, I'll personally escort you to the next stagecoach out of here. Abigail considered her options. Stay at the boarding house in a town where she knew no one and might be in danger? Try to make her way back east with limited funds? Or trust this stranger who claimed to have promised Thomas he would protect her? None of the choices were ideal, but one offered at least the possibility of answers. I need to collect my trunks, she said finally. They're being delivered to the boarding house. Ethan nodded. We'll stop there first. I'll wait outside while you explain to Mrs. Parker that you've made other arrangements. As they walked toward the boarding house, Abigail couldn't help but wonder if she was making a terrible mistake. But there was something about Ethan Blackwood, a steadiness, a quiet strength that made her want to trust him. The sun had almost disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the town in deepening shadows. As darkness fell over Copper Ridge, Abigail Montgomery made her decision. She would go with Ethan Blackwood to his ranch. She would discover the truth about Thomas Wheeler's death, and perhaps, in doing so, she would find a new path forward in this wild, dangerous land that was supposed to have been her home. What she couldn't know was that the danger was only beginning, and that before long, her life would depend on the protection of a man she had just met, a man with secrets of his own. The journey to Ethan Blackwood's ranch took nearly an hour, with darkness falling completely before they arrived. Abigail sat beside Ethan on his wagon, her trunk secured in the back, watching as the town of Copper Ridge faded into the distance behind them. Neither spoke much during the ride, each lost in their own thoughts, as the wagon wheels crunched over the rough terrain. When they finally crested a small hill, Abigail caught her first glimpse of the Blackwood Ranch. Nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance, the main house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of timber and stone. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. A corral held a few horses that lifted their heads at the sound of the approaching wagon. It's beautiful, Abigail said softly. Ethan glanced at her, then back at his property. It's taken 7 years to build it to what you see now. My father left me this land, but not much else. As they drew closer, a figure emerged from the main house, an older Native American woman with long silver-streaked black hair worn in a single braid. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching their approach with a stern expression. "That's Mrs. Redfeather," Ethan explained. "She's been with me since I started the ranch. Don't let her manner fool you. She's got a good heart." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped Abigail down. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Ethan's hand caught her elbow, steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, suddenly aware of how close he was. In the moonlight, his features seemed even more pronounced, the strong line of his jaw, the intensity of his dark eyes. He released her arm and stepped back. "Mrs. Red Feather," he called out. "This is Miss Abigail Montgomery. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's expression didn't change as she looked Abigail up and down. "The woman Thomas Wheeler sent for," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Abigail confirmed, "though I arrived too late." Mrs. Redfeather's face softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss. Come inside. You must be hungry and tired." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture, and shelves lined with books. More books than Abigail would have expected to find in a ranch house on the frontier. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. "You have quite a library," Abigail remarked, running her fingers along the spines. "My mother's influence," Ethan said from behind her. "She was a teacher before she married my father." "Was she Apache as well?" "No, she came west from Philadelphia. Met my father when her stagecoach was attacked by bandits. He saved her life." There was an undercurrent of pain in his voice. "They were both gone by the time I was 17. Before Abigail could respond, Mrs. Redfeather announced that supper was ready. The dining room was simple but elegant, with a polished oak table and chairs. The meal consisted of venison stew, fresh bread, and wild greens. Simple fare but delicious. "After weeks of travel food, Mr. Blackwood," Abigail said as they ate, "you mentioned that Thomas wrote to you before he died. Did he give any indication that he feared for his life?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Mrs. Redfeather before answering. "He didn't say it outright, just that he'd made some decisions that weren't sitting well with certain people in town." "What kind of decisions?" "He refused to sell his water rights to Farley Jenkins, for one. Jenkins has been buying up land all around the county, but without water, the land is worthless for cattle. Wheeler's property has one of the few year-round creeks in the area." "And the bank?" Abigail asked. "Mr. Dawson mentioned that Thomas owed them money. Calvin Burke runs the bank in Copper Ridge. He and Wheeler had a complicated history. Burke wanted Wheeler's land for his own reasons, something to do with a railroad coming through. There were rumors that Burke was putting pressure on Wheeler, calling in loans before they were due." Abigail considered this information. "So both Jenkins and Burke had reason to want Thomas's land. But surely you don't think one of them would have murdered him?" "Men have killed for less in these parts," Mrs. Redfeather said bluntly. "Land, water, gold, they're worth more than human life to some." "But Mr. Dawson said it was influenza," Abigail protested. "Doc Miller is the one who would have determined the cause of death," Ethan said, "and Doc Miller owes Burke money for his practice. He might say whatever Burke tells him to say." The implications were chilling. Abigail set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "What am I to do? I have no claim to Thomas's property, no way to prove anything if he was indeed murdered, and very limited funds to make my way elsewhere." "For now, you stay here where it's safe," Ethan said firmly. "Tomorrow, I'll ride into town and see what more I can find out. I know people who won't lie to me, even if they're afraid of Burke or Jenkins." After dinner, Mrs. Redfeather showed Abigail to a bedroom on the second floor. It was simple but comfortable, with a large bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. Her trunks had already been brought up. "Thank you for your hospitality," Abigail said to the older woman. "I know my arrival was unexpected." Mrs. Redfeather studied her for a moment. "Ethan doesn't bring people here, ever. You must be special." Before Abigail could respond to that puzzling statement, Mrs. Redfeather bid her good night and left, closing the door behind her. Alone at last, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning with the day's events. This morning, she had been full of hope for a new beginning with Thomas. Now he was dead, possibly murdered, and she was staying in the home of a man she had just met. A man who seemed to have his own mysterious connection to Thomas. From her window, she could see the vast expanse of land that made up the Blackwood Ranch, silvered by moonlight. In the distance, the dark shapes of mountains loomed against the star-filled sky. It was beautiful, in a wild and untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated her. With a sigh, Abigail began to unpack one of her trunks, seeking her nightclothes. As she did, her fingers brushed against the packet of letters from Thomas that she had brought with her. She pulled them out and sat at the small desk, untying the ribbon that held them together. Reading through them again, she searched for any hint that Thomas had been in trouble or feared for his life. His words were, as she remembered, warm, thoughtful, full of plans for their future together. He described the ranch, the house he had built for them, the life they would share. Nothing in his letters suggested fear or danger, yet he had written to Ethan Blackwood, asking him to protect her if anything happened. Why? What had changed between his last letter to her and his death? The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. She quickly gathered the letters and returned them to her trunk before a soft knock came at the door. Miss Montgomery. It was Ethan. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Abigail checked that she was presentable, then opened the door. Ethan stood in the hallway, holding a small wooden box. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I thought you should have this tonight." He held out the box. "It was Thomas's. He asked me to keep it safe for him about 2 weeks ago. Said if anything happened to him, it should go to you." Abigail took the box with trembling hands. It was about the size of a book, made of polished walnut with a simple brass latch. "Did he tell you what was inside?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. "No, only that it contained something that might protect you if he couldn't." Abigail's heart raced. "Thank you for giving this to me." Ethan nodded, then hesitated as if he wanted to say more. Finally, he simply said, "Good night, Miss Montgomery. Try to rest. Tomorrow may be a difficult day." After he left, Abigail returned to the desk and placed the box before her. Her fingers traced the smooth wood before finally lifting the latch. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a folded document and a small leather pouch. She opened the document first. It was a deed to Thomas Wheeler's ranch, and at the bottom, dated just 3 weeks ago, was Thomas's signature transferring ownership to Abigail Montgomery, my intended wife. Stunned, Abigail read the document twice more. According to this paper, she owned the Wheeler Ranch, but Mr. Dawson had said she had no legal claim without a marriage having taken place. Next, she opened the small leather pouch. Inside was a simple gold band, a wedding ring, and a note in Thomas's handwriting. "My dearest Abigail, if you are reading this, then my fears have been realized, and I am no longer able to welcome you to our home as I had hoped. I have made enemies here, men who would stop at nothing to take what is mine. I have transferred the deed to the ranch to your name, and I have entrusted this package to Ethan Blackwood, the only man in these parts I trust completely. The enclosed ring was my mother's. I had hoped to place it on your finger myself, but if fate has decided otherwise, please know that in my heart you are already my wife. Be careful who you trust in Copper Ridge. Ethan Blackwood may seem a hard man, but he is honorable to his core. Trust him as I have, with all my love." Thomas' tears blurred Abigail's vision as she finished reading. Thomas had tried to protect her, even in death. But the deed raised as many questions as it answered. If it was legal, why hadn't Mr. Dawson mentioned it? Did he not know about it? Or was he deliberately keeping it from her? And what of Ethan Blackwood? Thomas had trusted him implicitly, yet Ethan himself had said they weren't friends. What was the nature of their relationship, really? Abigail slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but the weight of it was comforting somehow, a tangible connection to the man she had hoped to marry. Sleep did not come easily that night. Abigail's dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and the sound of gunshots. She woke several times, each time reassured by the solid walls of the Blackwood house around her, knowing that whatever dangers lurked in Copper Ridge, they were, for the moment, held at bay. Morning arrived with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. Abigail dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, pinned her hair into a practical bun, and tucked the deed and Thomas's note securely into her pocket before heading downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Redfeather at the stove and Ethan seated at a small table, a mug of coffee in his hands. They both looked up as she entered. "Good morning," she said. "I hope I'm not too late for breakfast." "Just in time," Mrs. Redfeather replied, placing a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. As Abigail seated herself, Ethan studied her face. "You look tired. Did you not sleep well?" "I had much to think about," she admitted. After a moment's hesitation, she pulled the deed from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. "Thomas left me his ranch." Ethan didn't look surprised. He picked up the document and examined it. "This appears to be an order. It's properly signed and witnessed. Did you know about this?" Abigail asked. "I suspected," he admitted. "Thomas told me he was planning to put the ranch in your name, to protect it from Burke and Jenkins. I didn't know if he'd actually done it before he died. Why didn't you mention this last night? I didn't want to give you false hope. And I needed to be sure of a few things first." Abigail frowned. Such as whether Burke already knew about this deed. Ethan's expression was grim. "If he does, it would explain why Thomas died so suddenly, just days before you arrived." The implications were chilling. "You think Mr. Burke had Thomas killed because of this deed?" "It's possible. With Thomas dead and you not yet arrived, Burke might have thought he could claim the ranch through the debts Thomas owed the bank. He wouldn't have expected Thomas to have already transferred ownership. But now that I'm here, with the deed, now, you're in danger," Ethan finished for her. "If Burke is willing to kill once for that land, he won't hesitate to do it again." Mrs. Redfeather, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "The woman needs protection, Ethan. More than just staying here." Ethan nodded. "I know. That's why I sent for Marshal Wallace early this morning. He should be here by noon." "The federal marshal?" Abigail asked. "Yes. He's a good man, and he's not under Burke's influence. If there's been a murder, he'll investigate you properly." Abigail's mind was racing. "What should I do in the meantime? If this deed is legal, the ranch is mine. I should go there, see it for myself." "That would be foolish," Mrs. Redfeather said bluntly. "Until we know who killed Thomas Wheeler and why, you're safer here." "Mrs. Redfeather is right," Ethan agreed. "Stay here today. Once Marshal Wallace arrives, we can decide the next steps." Abigail wanted to protest, but knew they were right. She had no experience with the dangers of this territory, and the thought of facing men like Farley Jenkins or Calvin Burke alone was terrifying. "Very well," she conceded. "I'll stay, but I want to know everything you find out." Ethan finished his coffee and stood. "I need to check the south pasture. One of my hands reported seeing strangers near the property line yesterday." "Do you think it's related to all this?" Abigail asked. "I don't believe in coincidences." He replied grimly, "Not in this territory." He looked at Mrs. Redfeather. "Keep the rifle handy." The older woman nodded, and Ethan left, the sound of his spurs fading as he walked down the hallway. Mrs. Redfeather began clearing the breakfast dishes. "He's worried," she said. "I haven't seen him this tense in years." "You've known him a long time?" Abigail asked. "Since he was a boy. His father, John Blackwood, saved my husband's life during a raid. When both our husbands were killed years later, Ethan offered me a place here." She glanced at Abigail. "He doesn't trust easily, but once given, his loyalty is unshakable." "Thomas seemed to trust him," Abigail mused. Thomas Wheeler was a good judge of character. He was one of the few white men who treated Ethan with respect despite his Apache blood. Abigail hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind. What happened to Ethan's parents? He mentioned they died when he was 17. Mrs. Redfeather's face darkened. They were murdered. Their ranch burned to the ground. The authorities called it an Indian attack, but Ethan never believed that. His mother's people wouldn't have harmed her or her son. Does he know who was really responsible? He has his suspicions. Mrs. Redfeather gave Abigail a long look. Calvin Burke was just starting his bank back then. He needed land for investors coming from the east. Just like he needs Thomas's land now, Abigail whispered, the pieces beginning to fit together. Mrs. Redfeather nodded grimly. History has a way of repeating itself in these parts. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Redfeather moved quickly to the window, then reached for the rifle that hung above the door. "Stay inside," she ordered, her voice tense. "It's Farley Jenkins, and he's brought men with him." Abigail's heart hammered in her chest as she peered through the curtains. 6 riders were approaching the house, led by the bearded man she had encountered in town the previous day. All of them were armed. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. "Still checking the south pasture. He won't be back for at least an hour." Mrs. Redfeather checked the rifle with practiced hands. "Go upstairs and stay out of sight. I'll handle this. I can't leave you alone." "You can and you will," the older woman said firmly. "Ethan would never forgive me if something happened to you. Now go." Reluctantly, Abigail hurried upstairs, but instead of hiding, she went to the window of her room, which overlooked the front of the house. From there, she could see Jenkins and his men dismounting, their expressions grim and determined. As Mrs. Redfeather stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, Abigail realized that the danger Thomas had warned about in his letter had found her, despite all his precautions. And as Jenkins's voice carried up to her, demanding to know where Wheeler's woman was hiding, she knew that the deed in her pocket had just made her the most hunted person in Copper Ridge. From her upstairs window, Abigail watched with growing dread as Farley Jenkins and his men spread out in front of the house. Mrs. Redfeather stood firm on the porch, rifle raised but not yet aimed directly at the intruders. "Where is she, woman?" Jenkins demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I know Blackwood brought her here." "This is private property," Mrs. Redfeather replied calmly. "You and your men need to leave." Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound. "You think that rifle scares us? There's 6 of us and 1 of you. Now, I'm not looking to hurt anyone. I just want to talk to Miss Montgomery about Wheeler's ranch." "Mr. Blackwood isn't here," Mrs. Redfeather said. "Come back when he returns if you have business to discuss." One of Jenkins' men, a thin, wiry fellow with a pockmarked face, spat on the ground. "We ain't here to talk to the half-breed. We're here for the woman." Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. How did they know she had the deed? Had someone in town seen Thomas give the box to Ethan? Or was this simply about intimidating her as the newcomer who might have a claim to Thomas's property? Whatever the reason, she couldn't let Mrs. Redfeather face these men alone. Drawing a deep breath, Abigail checked her appearance in the small mirror, straightened her shoulders, and headed downstairs. "I'm right here, Mr. Jenkins," she called out as she stepped onto the porch beside Mrs. Redfeather. "There's no need to threaten anyone." "Miss Montgomery," Jenkins removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "we were just discussing your situation." "My situation is none of your concern," Abigail replied, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "Oh, but it is. You see, Thomas Wheeler died owing me quite a bit of money. His ranch rightfully belongs to me now. That's between you and the bank. Mr. Jenkins, I fail to see how it involves me." Jenkins' smile faded. "Don't play coy, miss. Word in town is that Wheeler might have left you something. A deed, perhaps?" So he did know. Abigail fought to keep her expression neutral. I arrived in Copper Ridge yesterday to find the man I was supposed to marry already buried. I'm simply trying to decide what to do next." "Well, I'd like to make you an offer," Jenkins said, taking a step closer to the porch. Mrs. Redfeather raised the rifle slightly, halting his advance. "If Wheeler did leave you anything, I'm prepared to buy it from you. A fair price, enough to get you settled back east." "That's very generous," Abigail replied carefully, "but as I said, I'm still considering my options." "Don't consider too long," Jenkins warned, his friendly facade slipping. "This territory isn't kind to women alone. Accidents happen, especially to those who get mixed up with men like Blackwood. Is that a threat, Mr. Jenkins?" "Just friendly advice. You're new here. You don't know who you can trust." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll give you until tomorrow to think about my offer. After that, things might get complicated." With a nod to his men, Jenkins turned and mounted his horse. The others followed suit, but they didn't immediately ride away. Instead, they sat watching the house, as if memorizing its layout. "This isn't over," Mrs. Redfeather muttered. "They're planning something." As if confirming her words, Jenkins called out one last time before riding off, "Tell Blackwood we stopped by, and tell him to remember what happened the last time he got between me and the land I wanted." Abigail and Mrs. Redfeather remained on the porch until the riders disappeared from view. Only then did Abigail release the breath she'd been holding, her knees suddenly weak with relief and delayed fear. "You should have stayed upstairs," Mrs. Redfeather scolded, but there was respect in her eyes. "I couldn't let you face them alone," Abigail replied. What did Jenkins mean about the last time Ethan got between him and land? Mrs. Redfeather's expression darkened. 3 years ago, Jenkins tried to force a widow, Sarah Miller, off her land. Ethan stood up for her, helped her keep the property. Jenkins never forgave him for it. What happened to Mrs. Miller? She eventually sold her land to a family from California, not to Jenkins, moved to Denver to be with her daughter. Mrs. Redfeather shouldered the rifle. "Come inside. We need to secure the house in case they come back." As they went back inside, Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that Jenkins's visit was just the beginning. "Where is this Marshal Wallace that Ethan sent for? Shouldn't he have arrived by now?" "The nearest federal marshal's office is in Prescott. It's a full day's ride. He won't be here until tomorrow at the earliest." Abigail's heart sank. A lot could happen in a day, especially with Jenkins and his men watching the ranch. "What should we do?" "Prepare," Mrs. Redfeather said simply. She walked to a cabinet in the corner of the main room and unlocked it, revealing several guns and boxes of ammunition. "Can you shoot?" "I've never even held a gun," Abigail admitted. Mrs. Redfeather sighed. "Then it's time you learned." She selected a small revolver and handed it to Abigail. "This is a Colt Lightning, smaller than most, good for a woman's hand. 5 shots, double action." Abigail took the gun gingerly, surprised by its weight. "I don't know if I could actually shoot someone." "When it's your life or theirs, you'll find you can," Mrs. Redfeather said grimly. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The next hour was spent with Mrs. Redfeather showing Abigail how to load, aim, and fire the revolver. They practiced in the barn, using empty bottles as targets. Abigail was a poor shot at first, but gradually improved under Mrs. Redfeather's patient instruction. "Not bad," the older woman said after Abigail finally hit a bottle. "Keep practicing. I need to prepare lunch." Left alone in the barn, Abigail continued to practice, each shot becoming more accurate as she grew accustomed to the revolver's weight and kick. The activity helped distract her from the fear that had settled in her stomach since Jenkins' visit. She was reloading the gun when the barn door opened. Startled, she almost dropped the weapon, then relaxed when she saw it was Ethan. "Mrs. Redfeather told me what happened," he said, his expression grim. "Jenkins is getting bolder." "He knows about the deed," Abigail replied. "How is that possible?" "Burke must have told him. They've been working together lately." Ethan glanced at the revolver in her hands. "I see Mrs. Redfeather has been teaching you to defend yourself." She thought it was necessary. Do you think Jenkins will come back? Not today. He'll wait until he thinks we've let our guard down. Ethan moved to stand beside her, gently adjusting her grip on the revolver. Hold it like this. It'll give you better control. His hands were warm and calloused against hers, steady and sure. Abigail was suddenly very aware of his proximity, of the scent of leather and horses that clung to him. She swallowed hard and focused on the target. I've sent one of my hands to look for Marshal Wallace, Ethan continued, stepping back, to hurry him along. In the meantime, I think we should move you to Wheeler's ranch. Abigail looked at him in surprise. I thought you said it wasn't safe. It's not, but Jenkins and his men will be watching this place now. They won't expect us to take you to Wheeler's property, and I need to show you something there, something that might explain why Thomas was killed. What is it? Better I show. You. We'll go at dusk when we're less likely to be seen. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense preparation. Ethan and his ranch hands patrolled the property, while Mrs. Redfeather packed food and supplies for their journey to Wheeler's ranch. Abigail continued practicing with the revolver until her arm ached, determined to be able to defend herself if necessary. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Ethan returned to the house. It's time, he said quietly. I've had the horses brought around back. Mrs. Redfeather handed Abigail a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, food, water, and a few other necessities. The revolver is already loaded, and in there too. You're not coming with us? Abigail asked, alarmed. Someone needs to stay here to maintain appearances, the older woman replied. If Jenkins or his men come back, they need to think you're still here. Abigail embraced Mrs. Redfeather impulsively. Thank you for everything. Please be careful. It's you who needs to be careful, Mrs. Redfeather said, returning the embrace briefly before stepping back. Listen to Ethan. He knows this territory better than anyone. They slipped out the back door of the house as darkness fell. 2 horses waited, already saddled. Ethan helped Abigail mount before swinging up onto his own horse, a powerful black stallion. Stay close, he murmured. We'll take the creek bed for the first few miles. It'll hide our tracks. They rode in silence, the only sounds the soft clopping of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a night bird. Abigail had never ridden at night before, and she found it both terrifying and exhilarating. The landscape was transformed by moonlight, familiar shapes becoming strange and mysterious. Ethan led them along a winding path, sometimes stopping to listen intently before moving on. After what seemed like hours, they created a ridge, and he held up a hand for her to halt. Wheeler's ranch, he said quietly, pointing to a valley below. Abigail peered into the darkness. A small ranch house was visible, along with a barn and corral. No lights shone from the windows, and the place had an abandoned feel that sent a shiver down her spine. It looked so empty, she whispered. It's been empty since Thomas died, Ethan replied. His foreman and the other hand left when they heard the bank might take the property. He nudged his horse forward. Come on, we'll approach from the east through that stand of trees. As they drew closer to the ranch, Abigail could make out more details in the moonlight. The house was smaller than Ethan's, but well built, with a wide porch and large windows. A garden, now untended, stretched along one side. It was exactly as Thomas had described it in his letters. Ethan led them to the barn rather than the house. We'll leave the horses here, he said, dismounting. Less chance of them being spotted if someone comes looking. Inside the barn, he lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The building was neat and well organized, with stalls for several. Horses, tack hanging on the walls and haylofts above. Thomas was a good rancher, Ethan commented, looking around. Keep everything in order. What did you want to show me? Abigail asked, her curiosity growing. It's in the house, but first we need to make sure we're alone. They approached the house cautiously, Ethan with his rifle ready, Abigail with the revolver Mrs. Redfeather had given her. The front door was locked, but Ethan produced a key from his pocket. "Thomas gave me this," he explained, "for emergencies." The interior of the house was dark and still, with furniture covered in sheets to protect it from dust. Ethan lit another lantern and led Abigail through the rooms. It was a comfortable home, simply but tastefully furnished, with a large stone fireplace in the main room and a well-equipped kitchen. "He built all this for you," Ethan said quietly. He was so sure. "You would love it here." Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. This should have been her home, her life with Thomas. Now it stood empty, waiting for new owners who might never appreciate the care and love that had gone into creating it. "You said there was something here that might explain why Thomas was killed," she reminded Ethan, forcing her thoughts away from what might have been. Ethan nodded and led her to a small study off the main room. A desk stood against one wall, its surface bare except for a ledger and an inkwell. He moved to a bookshelf and pulled out several volumes, revealing a small safe built into the wall behind them. "Thomas showed me this once," he said, working the combination. "Said if anything happened to him, I should check what was inside." The safe opened with a soft click. Ethan reached in and pulled out a leather folder. "This is what I wanted you to see." Abigail took the folder and opened it on the desk. Inside were maps, letters, and legal documents. She frowned as she examined them. "These are surveys and land deeds." "Not just any land," Ethan said. "Look at the dates and locations." As Abigail studied the documents more carefully, a pattern emerged. All of the properties were in Copper Ridge County, and all had been purchased within the last year by Thomas. "Wheeler, I don't understand," she said. "Why would Thomas buy all these different parcels of land? Some of them don't even look suitable for ranching." "They're not," Ethan agreed, "but they all have one thing in common." He pulled out a larger map and spread it on the desk. Each piece of land sits along the proposed route of the Southern Pacific Railroad. Abigail's eyes widened as she saw the line drawn across the map, connecting the scattered properties Thomas had purchased. He was buying land for the railroad. Not exactly. He was buying land the railroad would need. Ethan's voice was grim. "Calvin Burke has been working with the railroad for years, secretly acquiring property along their planned route. When the railroad officially announces the route, land prices will skyrocket. So Thomas was competing with Burke," Abigail said, understanding Dawn. "Buying the same land Burke wanted." "Yes, and there's more." Ethan showed her another document. "This letter is from the railroad. They were considering changing their route to go through Wheeler's ranch instead of the land Burke had been acquiring. Because of the water," Abigail realized. "They would need water for the steam engines." "Exactly. If the railroad chose Wheeler's route, all of Burke's land investments would be worthless." Ethan's expression was somber. "That's the motive for murder, Abigail. Burke stood to lose everything if Wheeler succeeded." The pieces were falling into place. Thomas's death, the sudden interest in his ranch, the pressure on Abigail to sell, it all made sense in light of these documents. "We need to take these to Marshal Wallace," she said. "They're evidence." "Yes, but first we should—" A sound from outside interrupted him. The distant but unmistakable noise of approaching horses. Ethan immediately extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move." He moved silently to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. Abigail held her breath, straining to hear. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Men's voices carried faintly on. The night air. Ethan returned to her side. "Jenkins and his men," he murmured in her ear. "At least 4 of them. They must have followed us somehow." "What do we do?" Abigail whispered back, fear clutching at her throat. "Take the documents and go out the back door. There's a root cellar about 50 yards behind the house. Hide there while I draw them away. I can't leave you to face them alone." "You have to." His voice was firm. "Those documents are the only proof we have of why Thomas was killed. If anything happens to them or to you, his death was for nothing." Before she could protest further, the crack of a rifle shot split the night. A bullet splintered the window frame, sending shards of wood flying. "Wheeler's woman," Jenkins' voice bellowed. "From outside. We know you're in there. Come out now, and nobody gets hurt." Ethan grabbed Abigail's hand and pulled her toward the back of the house. "They're trying to scare us into doing something stupid," he whispered. "Stay low." They crouched as they moved through the darkened house, another shot ringing out behind them. When they reached the kitchen, Ethan checked the back door and yard. "It looks clear, but they might have men circling around," he said. "When I open the door, run straight for the root cellar. Don't stop. Don't look back." "What about you?" Abigail clutched the leather folder to her chest, her heart pounding. "I'll hold them off, then join you." He touched her cheek briefly. "Be ready." Ethan threw open the door and fired 2 quick shots into the darkness, providing cover. Abigail ran, her skirts gathered in one hand, the precious documents in the other. The night air was cool on her face as she sprinted across the open ground, expecting at any moment to hear a shot or feel a bullet. The root cellar was built into a small hillside, its wooden doors lying flat against the ground. Abigail yanked one open and nearly fell down the steps in her haste. Once inside, she pulled the door closed above her, plunging herself into complete darkness. The earthen cellar smelled of dirt and old vegetables. Abigail felt her way to the far wall and huddled there, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. The gunfire continued outside, one shot, then another, then a rapid succession that made her flinch with each crack. Minutes stretched endlessly. The shooting seemed to move away from the house, then back again. Abigail clutched Thomas's revolver, her palms slick with sweat. What was happening? Was Ethan alive? Had Jenkins and his men found him? A sudden silence fell, more terrifying than the gunfire. Abigail strained to hear anything, voices, footsteps, horses, but there was nothing. The silence stretched on until she began to wonder if both sides had somehow killed each other, leaving her alone. Then, so faint she almost missed it, came the sound of approaching footsteps. Someone was walking directly toward the root cellar, heavy boots on dirt, moving slowly but deliberately. Abigail raised the revolver, aiming it at the doors above her. Her finger trembled on the trigger as one of the doors creaked open, allowing a sliver of moonlight to penetrate the darkness. "Abigail," Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you in there?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes," she whispered back. The door opened wider, and Ethan's silhouette appeared against the night sky. "It's safe for now," he said. "Jenkins and his men retreated, but they'll be back with reinforcements." Abigail climbed out of the cellar, still clutching the leather folder. "Are you hurt?" "Just a graze," he said dismissively, though she could see a dark stain on his left sleeve. "We need to move quickly. Our horses might have been spooked by the gunfire. We'll have to go on foot for now." "Where?" "There's an old Apache cave system, about 2 miles from here. We can hide there until morning, then try to reach town and find Marshal Wallace." As they moved away from the ranch, keeping to the shadows, Abigail glanced back at the house that should have been her home. In just 2 days, her life had been turned upside down. She had arrived in Copperidge expecting to be a bride. Now she was running for her life, clutching evidence of a murder plot, with only a half-Apache rancher she barely knew for protection. Yet somehow, as Ethan led her into the wilderness, she felt a strange sense of clarity. Thomas had trusted this man with his life, and now so did she. The night stretched before them, full of dangers but also possibilities. And somewhere in the darkness ahead was the truth about Thomas Wheeler's death, a truth that someone was willing to kill to keep hidden. The night air grew colder as Ethan led Abigail deeper into the rugged terrain beyond Thomas's ranch. They moved in silence, keeping to the shadows cast by the moonlight, stopping occasionally to listen for pursuers. Abigail's city boots were not made for such rough country, and blisters had begun to form on her heels, but she pressed on without complaint. After nearly 2 hours of walking, they reached the base of a steep rock formation. Ethan paused, scanning the area carefully before gesturing for Abigail to follow him up a narrow path that twisted between boulders. "Watch your step," he murmured. "The entrance is hidden." The path ended abruptly at what appeared to be a solid rock face. Ethan moved aside some brush that had been deliberately placed, revealing a dark opening barely large enough for a person to slip through sideways. "It doesn't look like much from out here," he said, "but it opens up inside." He entered first, then reached back to guide Abigail through the narrow passage. Inside, the cave widened dramatically. Ethan struck a match, illuminating a spacious chamber with a high ceiling. Several smaller passages led off in different directions. "My father showed me this place when I was a boy," Ethan explained, lighting a small oil lamp he'd pulled from his pack. "It was a sacred site for my mother's people, and later a hiding place during raids. Few outsiders know of its existence." In the soft glow of the lamp, Abigail could see ancient paintings on the walls, handprints, animals, and abstract symbols in red and white pigment. "It's beautiful," she breathed, momentarily forgetting their danger. "The paintings are hundreds of years old," Ethan said. "My mother's ancestors believed this cave connected our world to the spirit world." He set the lamp on a flat rock. "We should be safe here for the night. Jenkins doesn't know about this place." Abigail sank onto a boulder, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The events of the past 2 days crashed over her like a wave. Thomas's death, the discovery of the deed, Jenkins' threats, and now their flight through the wilderness. It was almost too much to comprehend. "Here," Ethan handed her a canteen of water. "Small sips. We need to make it last." She drank gratefully, then remembered his injury. "Your arm. Let me see it." He hesitated, then sat beside her and rolled up his sleeve. The bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow in the muscle. "It needs cleaning," she said, opening the bundle Mrs. Redfeather had packed. Inside, among the food and water, she found a small medical kit. "Mrs. Redfeather thinks of everything. She saved my life more than once," Ethan said with a hint of a smile. Abigail cleaned the wound with water and a strip of cloth, then applied a salve from the kit. Ethan winced, but made no sound as she worked. "You've done this before," he observed. "I volunteered as a nurse during the last year of the war," she explained. "I saw far worse injuries than this." She tied a bandage around his arm. "There, it should heal clean now." "Thank you." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that startled Abigail with its intensity. She looked away first, busying herself with returning the medical supplies to the bundle. "You should try to rest," Ethan said after a moment. "I'll keep watch." "What about you? You're injured and haven't slept either." "I'm used to going without sleep." Apache warriors learned to stay alert for days when necessary. Abigail wanted to argue, but couldn't deny her own exhaustion. She arranged her skirts as best she could and used the bundle as a pillow. Settling onto a relatively flat area of the cave floor, "I'll wake you at dawn," Ethan promised, moving to sit near the cave entrance where he could watch for any sign of pursuers. Despite her fatigue, sleep didn't come easily. Abigail's mind raced with questions and fears. What will happen tomorrow? Would they be able to reach Marshal Wallace? Would the documents they carried be enough to prove Burke's involvement in Thomas's death? And beneath these practical concerns lay deeper, more troubling thoughts. Thoughts about Ethan Blackwood, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness, the way his eyes seemed to see through her carefully maintained composure. She had come to Arizona to marry Thomas Wheeler, a man she knew only through his letters. Now Thomas was gone, and she found herself placing her trust, perhaps even her life, in the hands of this mysterious half-Apache rancher. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her churning thoughts, and she drifted into a fitful sleep, filled with disjointed dreams of gunfire, running horses, and dark, watchful eyes. When Ethan woke her, the faint grey light of pre-dawn was filtering through the cave entrance. For a moment, Abigail was disoriented, confused by the hard stone beneath her and the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's time," Ethan said softly, helping her to her feet. "We need to move while it's still early. With luck, we can reach town before Jenkins organizes a full search." Abigail stretched her stiff limbs, wincing at the soreness in muscles unaccustomed to such exertion. Her dress was dirty and torn in places. Her hair had come loose from its pins, and she knew she must look frightened. But such concerns seemed trivial now, with their lives potentially at stake. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and dried fruit from Mrs. Redfeather's bundle, then gathered their few possessions. The leather folder with Thomas's documents was carefully tucked inside Abigail's bodice, the safest place she could think to carry it. "What's our plan?" she asked as they prepared to leave the cave. "We'll follow Coyote Creek down to the valley," Ethan explained. "It's longer than going directly across an open country, but it offers more cover. Once we reach the valley, we're only about 3 miles from town. And when we get to town, we can't simply walk into the sheriff's office, not if Burke has influence there." "No," Ethan agreed. "We need to find Marshal Wallace. If he hasn't arrived yet, there's a telegraph office at the train station. We can send an urgent message to his office in Prescott." They left the cave as the sky lightened, the first rays of the sun just beginning to touch the highest peaks around them. The morning was cool and clear, with a light breeze that carried the scent of sage and juniper. Under different circumstances, Abigail might have found the landscape beautiful, even exhilarating in its wild grandeur. Now, every rock and bush seemed a potential hiding place for enemies. Ethan led the way down a steep, winding path to the creek bed below. The creek itself was little more than a trickle this late in the season, but the route it had carved through the landscape provided natural cover as they made their way toward the valley. They had been walking for perhaps an hour, when Ethan suddenly froze, raising a hand for Abigail to stop. He cocked his head, listening intently, then pulled her behind a large boulder. "Riders," he whispered, "coming this way." Abigail's heart raced as she strained to hear. After a moment she caught it, the distant sound of horses moving at a steady pace, their hooves striking rock and hard-packed earth. "Jenkins," she whispered back. "Probably. They must have picked up our trail." "How? We were so careful." "Jenkins has a tracker who used to scout for the cavalry. He can follow signs most men would miss." Ethan peered cautiously around the boulder. "They're still a ways off, but they're heading in the right direction." "What do we do?" Ethan considered. "For a moment. There's an old mining tunnel about half a mile ahead. It branches off from the creek bed. We can use it to reach the other side of that ridge." He pointed to a rocky outcropping to their east. "It'll slow them down, maybe lose them completely if we're lucky." They moved quickly but carefully, staying low and using the creek bank for cover. The sound of the riders grew gradually louder, though still distant. As they rounded a bend in the creek, Ethan pointed to a dark opening in the rock face to their right. "There, that's the tunnel." The entrance partially collapsed, leaving a gap just large enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air was cool and damp, with the musty smell of earth and old timbers. Ethan lit a match, revealing a narrow tunnel shored up at intervals with wooden beams. Some had rotted, and in places the ceiling had partially caved in. "Is it safe?" Abigail asked, uncertainty. "Safe enough if we move carefully," Ethan replied. "It hasn't been used in years, but the main support beams are still solid." They advanced slowly, Ethan lighting matches periodically to guide their way. The tunnel sloped gently upward, twisting and turning as it followed a long, depleted vein of silver ore. In some places they had to crouch to avoid low-hanging beams. In others, they picked their way around piles of fallen rock. "How much farther?" Abigail asked after what seemed like an eternity in the dark, confined space. Her nerves were stretched thin, and she couldn't help imagining the tons of rock and earth above them, waiting to come crashing down. Not much. There should be a junction. Soon, then a shaft leading up to the surface. Almost as soon as he spoke, the tunnel widened into a small chamber with 3 passages branching off in different directions. Ethan studied them by matchlight, then pointed to the rightmost tunnel. "This way. The other paths lead deeper into the mountain." The new tunnel was narrower than the first, and they had to proceed single file, Ethan leading. After another few minutes of careful progress, they reached a vertical shaft with crude wooden ladder rungs set into the wall. "This leads to the surface," Ethan said. "I'll go first to make sure it's clear, then help you up." He climbed the ladder nimbly despite his injured arm. At the top, he pushed aside a covering of brush and dirt, then disappeared from view. Moments later, his face reappeared at the opening. "It's clear. Come up slowly. Some of the rungs are rotted." Abigail gathered her skirts and began to climb. The ladder creaked ominously under her weight, and halfway up, one of the rungs broke beneath her foot. She gasped, clinging to the sides of the shaft as her foot dangled in empty space. "Easy," Ethan called down. "Take a deep breath. There's another rung just below your foot." She found it with her toe and continued upward more cautiously. Relief washing over her when Ethan's strong hands caught her arms and pulled her up the last few feet onto solid ground. They emerged into a small clearing, surrounded by scrub oak and pinyon pine. To the east, the terrain dropped away into the valley Ethan had mentioned, with Copper Ridge visible as a distant cluster of buildings. To the west rose the ridge they had just passed through, and beyond it the higher peaks where they had spent the night. "We had a good time," Ethan said, scanning the horizon. "No sign of Jenkins and his men. They'll waste hours searching the creek bed once they lose our trail." "How far is the town now?" Abigail asked, brushing dirt from her dress. "About 4 miles. We'll need to be careful as we get closer. Burke will have men watching the roads." They set off toward the valley, keeping to the tree line where possible for cover. The sun was higher now, its heat increasing as morning gave way to midday. Abigail's throat was parched, her water gone, but she pressed on without complaint. As they neared the valley floor, the vegetation thinned, offering less concealment. They paused at the edge of a large open area, considering their options. "We'll have to cross that open ground to reach the road," Ethan said. "It's risky, but faster than circling around." Before Abigail could respond, the distant crack of a rifle. A shot split the air. A bullet kicked up dirt just a few feet away. "Down!" Ethan shouted, pulling her behind a fallen log. More shots followed, the bullets thudding into the log or whining overhead as they ricocheted off rocks. Abigail pressed herself into the earth, heart hammering in her chest. "They must have guessed where we were heading," Ethan said grimly. "They've cut us off from town." "How many?" Abigail asked, her voice shaking. Ethan risked a quick glance over the log. 3 that I can see, spread out along that ridge to the east. There could be more." Another volley of shots forced him back down. "They're trying to pin us here until Jenkins arrives with the rest of his men," Ethan said. He checked his rifle, counting his remaining ammunition. "I've got 8 shots left, not enough to hold them off for long." Abigail felt for the revolver. In her pocket. "I still have 5 shots." Ethan gave her a grim smile. "Let's hope we don't need them." He studied their surroundings, calculating. "There's a wash about 50 yards to our right. If we can reach it, it might give us cover to circle." Back toward the mining camp. "There's an old trail from there that leads to the north end of town." "How do we reach the wash?" "They'll shoot us the moment we move. I'll provide covering fire, draw their attention. When I say go, you run for that cluster of rocks, then to the wash. Don't stop. Don't look back." Abigail's throat tightened with fear. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you." Something in his voice made her doubt him, made her suspect he was planning to sacrifice himself to ensure her escape. Before she could protest, he squeezed her hand once, then rose to a crouch. "Ready? 3, 2, 1, go!" Ethan stood and fired rapidly at the distant figures, forcing them to take cover. Abigail ran, her skirts hitched up, her lungs burning, as she sprinted for the rocks. Bullets kicked up dust around her, but none found their mark. She reached the rocks and paused, looking back for Ethan. He was still by the log, firing steadily, providing her the time she needed. As his rifle clicked on an empty chamber, he dropped it and drew his pistol, continuing to fire as he finally began to run toward her. A cry of pain tore from his lips as a bullet found its target, striking him in the side. He stumbled, but kept moving, reaching the rocks and collapsing beside her. "Ethan!" Abigail cried, seeing the blood spreading across his shirt. "Keep going," he gasped. "The wash! Get to the wash!" She looked at the gully, still 30 yards away across open ground, then back at Ethan, his face pale with pain and blood loss. "I won't leave you," she said firmly. "Don't be a fool," he gritted out. "Those documents are more important than either of us. Thomas died for them, and I won't let you die for them too." Determination replaced fear as Abigail tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it against his wound. "Can you stand?" With her help, Ethan struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on her smaller frame. Together, they staggered toward the wash, moving as fast as Ethan's injury would allow. The shooting had stopped momentarily. The gunmen were likely changing position, preparing for a better angle. They were still 15 yards from the wash when the firing resumed. Abigail felt Ethan jerk as another bullet found him, this one grazing his thigh. He stumbled, nearly bringing them both down, but somehow stayed upright. "Leave me," he gasped. "Save yourself." Instead, Abigail drew the revolver from her pocket and fired back at their attackers, forcing them to take cover. Her shots went wild, but they bought the precious seconds needed to reach the wash. They half fell down the steep bank, landing in the dry bed of what had once been a stream. It was about 6 feet deep, offering protection from the gunfire above. Abigail dragged Ethan into the shadow of the overhanging bank, then examined his wounds. The bullet in his side hadn't exited, a bad sign. His thigh was bleeding steadily, though the bullet had only carved a furrow in the muscle. His face was grey with pain and blood loss. "You need a doctor," she said, tearing more strips from her petticoat to bind his wounds as best she could. "No time," Ethan whispered. "They'll be coming down to finish us. You need to go on alone." "I told you, I'm not leaving you. Abigail, listen to me." His dark eyes, through clouded with pain, fixed on hers intently. "Those men will kill us both. If they find us, the documents you carry are the only way to prove what Burke and Jenkins have done. Thomas trusted you to see this through." A commotion from above interrupted them, men's voices, the sound of horses. Then a new voice, authoritative and commanding. "This is United States Marshal James Wallace. Drop your weapons and identify yourselves." Abigail and Ethan exchanged a look of disbelief. Has help truly arrived at this critical moment? "Stay here," Abigail said. She crawled to the edge of the wash and peered cautiously over the rim. On the ridge where the gunmen had been positioned, she could see several men with their hands raised, facing a group of riders led by a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest. Marshal Wallace had indeed arrived, and with him were several deputies and Mrs. Redfeather. "Marshal!" Abigail called out, waving her arm. "Down here! We need help!" Wallace spotted her and waved back, directing 2 of his men to come to their aid, while the others secured the prisoners. Mrs. Redfeather rode ahead of them, reaching the wash first and dismounting with surprising agility for her age. "Ethan!" she called, sliding down the bank to where he lay. Her expression grew grave as she saw his wounds. "How bad?" He's been shot twice, Abigail explained, still applying pressure to his side. One bullet is still inside him. The marshal's men arrived with a stretcher. Under Mrs. Redfeather's direction, they carefully lifted Ethan onto it and carried him up the bank to where the horses waited. "Miss Montgomery?" Marshal Wallace approached her, hat in hand. "I'm James Wallace, United States Marshal." Mrs. Redfeather told me what's been happening. Said you have evidence regarding Thomas Wheeler's death. Abigail nodded, retrieving the leather folder from inside her bodice. These documents show why Calvin Burke and Farley Jenkins wanted Thomas dead. It's about the railroad, land speculation. Thomas was buying property along the proposed route. Wallace took the folder and flipped through it quickly. This is serious evidence, enough to warrant a full investigation. He looked at her with respect. "You've shown remarkable courage, Miss Montgomery. Please, we need to get Ethan to a doctor," she urged. "Of course, my men have secured a wagon. We'll take him directly to Doc Miller in town." "Not Miller," Mrs. Redfeather interrupted sharply. "He's in Burke's pocket. There's a Navajo healer 5 miles north of here who can remove the bullets safely." Wallace hesitated, then nodded. "Lead the way, Mrs. Redfeather. 2 of my deputies will accompany you. The rest of us will escort Miss Montgomery to town and secure these prisoners." As they prepared to part ways, Abigail moved to Ethan's side. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. "Ethan," she said softly, taking his hand. "Hold on. Mrs. Redfeather is taking you to a healer." His eyes opened slightly, focusing on her with effort. "The documents?" "Safe. Marshal Wallace has them now." A faint smile touched his lips. "Thomas would be proud of you." Impulsively, Abigail leaned down and pressed her lips to his forehead. "I'll come to you as soon as I can," she promised, as Mrs. Redfeather and the deputies departed with Ethan. Marshal Wallace helped Abigail onto his horse. "Ready to face Copper Ridge, Miss Montgomery?" he asked. Abigail looked toward the distant town, thinking of all that had transpired since her arrival just 2 days ago. She had come seeking a husband, and found instead a web of greed, murder, and corruption. But she had also found courage within herself that she never knew she possessed, and perhaps something else, something unexpected and fragile that had begun to grow between her and a half Apache rancher who had risked his life for hers. "Yes, Marshal," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm ready." As they rode toward Copper Ridge, Abigail knew that the danger wasn't over. Burke and Jenkins still had power and influence in town. There would be a fight ahead, legal battles over Thomas's land, perhaps even threats to her safety. But for the first time since learning of Thomas's death, she felt a sense of purpose and determination. Justice would be served. Thomas's killer would be brought to account. And after that, she would face whatever the future held with the same courage she had discovered in the Arizona wilderness. The ride into Copper Ridge was tense and silent. Marshal Wallace and his deputies surrounded Abigail protectively. Their prisoners, 3 of Jenkins' hired guns, bound and riding ahead under close watch. News of their approach spread quickly, and by the time they reached Main Street, townspeople had gathered on porches and in doorways, watching with undisguised curiosity. "Word travels fast in small towns," Marshal Wallace commented, "especially when it involves gunfire and a federal marshal." They came to a stop outside the sheriff's office, a small wooden building next to the jailhouse. Sheriff Davis emerged, a portly man with a bushy mustache and wary eyes. "Marshal Wallace," he acknowledged stiffly. "Wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Circumstances demanded I arrive sooner," Wallace replied. "I've got 3 prisoners for your jail, Sheriff. Attempted murder of a federal witness." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Abigail, then back to Wallace. "I wasn't aware of any federal investigation in my jurisdiction. You are now." Wallace dismounted and helped Abigail down. "Miss Montgomery has evidence concerning the death of Thomas Wheeler and land fraud involving the Southern Pacific Railroad." Sheriff Davis paled visibly. "That's a serious accusation." "Marshal." "Yes, it is. I'll need to use your office to take Miss Montgomery's statement officially." Wallace's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. As they entered the sheriff's office, Abigail was acutely aware of her appearance. Her torn, dirty dress, her disheveled hair, the dried blood on her hands from tending to Ethan's wounds. She must look like a wild woman, nothing like the prim schoolteacher who had arrived in Copper Ridge just 2 days ago. Wallace directed her to a chair, then sent a deputy to fetch clean water and food. Sheriff Davis hovered uncomfortably, clearly torn between his duty and his loyalties. "Sheriff, I'd like you to send a deputy to bring Calvin Burke here," Wallace said. "Tell him it's regarding Thomas Wheeler's property." "Burke won't take kindly to being summoned like a common criminal," Davis protested. "Then he's welcome to bring his lawyer," Wallace replied evenly. "But he will come, one way or another." After Davis reluctantly left to carry out this order, Wallace turned to Abigail. "Now, Miss Montgomery, I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how insignificant it might seem." For the next hour, Abigail recounted her story, her correspondence with Thomas, her journey west, her arrival to find him dead, the deed he had left her, the threats from Jenkins, and the discovery of the land speculation documents. Wallace listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly allowing her to speak uninterrupted. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he said when she finished. "Few women, or men for that matter, would have shown such courage." "I didn't feel courageous," Abigail admitted. "I was terrified most of the time. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Miss Montgomery. It's acting despite it." Wallace studied the documents she had brought. "These provide a clear motive for murder. The question is whether we can prove Burke or Jenkins actually had Wheeler killed." "Thomas's letter said he feared for his life," Abigail reminded him, "and Mr. Dawson said he died of influenza, but Ethan doubted that." "We'll need to exhume the body," Wallace said grimly. "If Wheeler was poisoned, there might still be evidence." The thought of disturbing Thomas's grave was distressing, but Abigail nodded. "If that's what it takes to bring his killer to justice." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Calvin Burke. He strode into the office as if he owned it, a tall, distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed. Behind him came a nervous-looking young man carrying a briefcase whom Abigail took to be his lawyer. "Marshal Wallace," Burke said with forced cordiality. "This is a surprise. I wasn't aware the federal authorities had business in Copper Ridge." "Mr. Burke," Wallace acknowledged, not rising from his seat, "thank you for coming. This is Miss Abigail Montgomery." Burke's eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Abigail's disheveled appearance. "Ah, yes, Thomas Wheeler's mail-order bride. I heard you had arrived." His tone managed to make the words sound vaguely insulting. "My condolences on your loss, Miss Montgomery." "Thank you," Abigail replied coolly, "though I suspect your condolences might be less than sincere, given your interest in acquiring Thomas's property." A flash of anger crossed Burke's face before his composed mask slipped back into place. "I don't know what you're implying, Miss Montgomery, but I can assure you my business dealings are always above board." "Including your land purchases along the proposed railroad route?" Wallace asked mildly, sliding one of the documents across the desk. "And your attempts to pressure Wheeler into selling his water rights?" Burke glanced at the document but didn't touch it. "I see no reason to discuss my private business affairs with you, Marshal. If you have an actual accusation to make, I suggest you do so. Otherwise, I have matters requiring my attention." "Very well, Mr. Burke. I'm investigating the death of Thomas Wheeler on suspicion of murder." Burke's lawyer stepped forward hastily. "That's outrageous. Mr. Wheeler died of natural causes." "Dr. Miller confirmed it." "Did he?" Wallace asked. We'll be speaking with Dr. Miller shortly, and I've already sent a telegram to Judge Hollister requesting an exhumation order for Mr. Wheeler's body. The blood drained from Burke's face. This is absurd. You have no grounds. I have evidence suggesting Wheeler's death directly benefited certain parties who stood to lose considerably if he remained alive, Wallace interrupted. I have a witness who received a letter from Wheeler expressing fear for his life, and I have documented proof of land speculation that provides motive for murder. Burke's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Burke waved him away. This is a fishing expedition, Marshal. You have no proof linking me to Wheeler's death because there is none. He died of influenza, as half the town can attest. Then you won't mind if we verify that through proper medical examination, Wallace replied. In the meantime, I'd advise you not to leave town, Mr. Burke. Burke's face darkened with anger. Are you placing me under house arrest, Marshal? On what authority? Consider it a friendly request for now, Wallace said, but attempt to leave Copper Ridge, and I'll have grounds for much more than that. After Burke stormed out, Wallace turned to Abigail. He's worried. A guilty man would be looking for a way to run right about now. Will he? Abigail asked. I've got deputies watching his house and the bank. If he tries to flee, we'll know. Wallace rose from the desk. You need rest, Miss Montgomery. I've arranged a room for you at the hotel under guard. It's not as remote as Blackwood's ranch, but it's secure. I appreciate that, Marshal, but I'd like to check on Ethan first. His wounds were serious, Mrs. Redfeather sent word. The healer removed the bullet, and Blackwood is stable for now. Mrs. Redfeather suggested you rest today and visit tomorrow when he's stronger. Reluctantly, Abigail agreed. Now that the immediate danger had passed, exhaustion was catching up with her. She allowed Wallace to escort her to the hotel, where the proprietor's wife, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Larson, fussed over her condition and arranged a hot bath and clean clothes. Don't you worry about a thing, dear, Mrs. Larson said. The marshal has a deputy right outside your door. No one's going to bother you here. Cleaned and dressed in a borrowed nightgown, Abigail sank gratefully into the hotel bed. Despite her exhaustion, her mind continued to race with thoughts of Ethan, wounded because he had protected her, of Thomas, whose death she was now determined to avenge, and of Burke and Jenkins, powerful men who would not easily be brought to justice. She must have slept eventually, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and someone was knocking softly at her door. Miss Montgomery? It was Mrs. Larson. Are you awake, dear? There's breakfast waiting, and Marshal Wallace would like to see you when you're ready. Abigail dressed quickly, in clothes Mrs. Larson had procured for her. A simple blue dress that was slightly too large but clean and serviceable. After a hearty breakfast that she hadn't realized how desperately she needed, she met with Marshal Wallace in the hotel's small private dining room. You're looking much improved, he greeted her. A good night's rest can work wonders. Thank you, Marshal. Has there been any news? Quite a bit, actually. Wallace's expression was grim but satisfied. Burke tried to leave town last night. My deputies caught him at the train station with a wallet full of cash and documents. He's in custody now. Has he confessed to Thomas's murder? Not yet, but he's implicated Farley Jenkins. Claims Jenkins acted alone in having Wheeler killed without his knowledge or approval. Do you believe him? No, Wallace said bluntly. Burke's too clever to get his own hands dirty, but nothing happens in Copper Ridge without his approval. We're bringing Jenkins in now. With both men in custody, one of them will eventually turn on the other to save themselves. And the exhumation order? Judge Hollister arrived this morning. The exhumation will take place today, with a proper medical examiner from Prescott conducting the examination. Abigail nodded, steeling herself against the distress of knowing Thomas's body would be disturbed. It was necessary, she reminded herself. Justice demanded it. There's something else you should know, Wallace continued. Word of your ownership of Wheeler's ranch has spread. Burke's lawyer is challenging the validity of the deed, claiming Wheeler wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. That's ridiculous, Abigail protested. The deed was witnessed and properly signed weeks before his death. Yes, but without Thomas alive to confirm his intentions, it could become a legal battle. You might want to consider engaging a lawyer of your own. I don't have the funds for a prolonged legal fight, Abigail admitted. Actually, Wallace said with a slight smile, I took the liberty of sending a telegram to an old friend in Prescott, a former judge who now practices law. He's agreed to represent you pro bono, at least initially. He has a particular dislike for railroad land speculators like Burke. Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes at this unexpected kindness. Thank you, Marshal. I don't know what to say. Save. Your thanks for when we've won your case, he replied. Now, I believe you wanted to visit Blackwood. Mrs. Redfeather sent word that he's conscious and asking for you. A deputy escorted Abigail to the north of town, where the Navajo healer lived in a small cabin surrounded by herb gardens. Mrs. Redfeather met her at the door looking tired but relieved. He is awake, she said, as a way of greeting. Stubborn. Man refused to rest until he saw you were safe with his own eyes. The healer, an elderly woman named Gentle Doe, led Abigail to a small back room where Ethan lay on a pallet. His upper body was bare, except for bandages, his skin unnaturally pale, against the dark braids of his hair. But his eyes were clear and alert as they fixed on her. Abigail, he said, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. You're all right. I'm fine, she assured him, kneeling beside the pallet. Thanks to you and Mrs. Redfeather, Marshal Wallace has Burke in custody, and they're bringing in Jenkins. Relief washed over Ethan's features. Good, that's good. He tried to shift position and winced. Did they find proof of Wheeler's murder? They're exhuming his body today, Abigail said softly. If he was poisoned, they'll find evidence. Ethan nodded, then looked at her more intently. And the ranch, your claim. Burke's lawyer is challenging the deed, but Marshal Wallace has found a lawyer to represent me. Old Judge Larkin, Abigail blinked in surprise. I believe that was the name, yes. Do you know him? A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. He represented my father once in a water rights dispute. Good man, honest, he'll fight for you. There was an awkward pause, both of them suddenly uncertain what to say next. Abigail was acutely aware of Mrs. Redfeather and the healer watching from the doorway. I should let you rest, she said finally. The healer says you need to rebuild your strength. Ethan caught her hand as she started to rise. Abigail, his dark eyes held hers. When this is over, when Burke and Jenkins face justice for what they've done, what will you do? It was a question she'd been asking herself since arriving. In Copper Ridge, what future could she possibly have here, in this wild, dangerous territory, so different from her orderly life in Boston? I don't know, she admitted. I came west to marry a man I knew only through his letters. Now he's gone, and I'm left with a property I never sought and enemies I never made. You could sell the ranch, Ethan suggested quietly. Go back east, with enough money to start over. Is that what you think I should do? His gaze didn't waver. I think you should do whatever brings you happiness, Abigail Montgomery. You've earned that right. Before she could respond, Gentle Doe approached, murmuring something to Ethan in a language Abigail didn't understand. He replied in the same tongue, then looked back at Abigail. The healer says, I need to rest now, he translated, and that you'll be welcome to return tomorrow. I'll come, Abigail promised, reluctantly releasing his hand. Rest and heal, Ethan. That's an order. His soft chuckle followed her out of the room, warming her heart despite the difficulties that still lay ahead. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and preparations for what was becoming the most significant criminal case in Copper Ridge's history. Judge Hollister set up court in the town hall, with crowds gathering daily to hear the latest developments. The exhumation confirmed what Ethan had suspected. Thomas Wheeler had not died of influenza. Traces of arsenic were found in his remains, enough to prove murder. Initially, both Burke and Jenkins maintained their innocence, each accusing the other of orchestrating the crime. But when Jenkins' foreman, a nervous man named Silas Tucker, came forward to testify that he had personally delivered money from Jenkins to Dr. Miller to falsify the cause of death, the case broke wide open. Dr. Miller, faced with the prospect of hanging as an accessory to murder, confessed that he had provided the arsenic to Jenkins, who had arranged for it to be administered to Wheeler in small doses over several weeks, making it appear like a wasting illness that finally culminated in influenza. Jenkins, seeing his former allies turning against him, finally implicated Burke as the mastermind who had ordered Wheeler's death to protect their railroad land investments. In exchange for his testimony, Jenkins was offered life imprisonment. Rather than the gallows, Burke maintained his innocence to the end, even as the evidence mounted against him. But when Judge Hollister's court heard testimony about the land speculation scheme, the falsified medical reports, and the attempts to intimidate Abigail into surrendering the deed, his fate was sealed. On a crisp autumn morning, Judge Hollister delivered his verdict. Calvin Burke and Farley Jenkins were found guilty of conspiracy and murder in the first degree. Burke was sentenced to hang, Jenkins to life imprisonment for his cooperation with the prosecution. As the court adjourned for the final time, Abigail sat quietly, trying to process the complex emotions swirling within her. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Thomas back. She had won legal recognition of her claim to his ranch. But what would she do with it now? Marshal Wallace approached, hat in hand. "It's over, Miss Montgomery. You should be proud of the part you played in bringing these men to justice." "I wish it hadn't been necessary," she replied. "So many lives destroyed by greed." "That's often the way of it," Wallace agreed. "But sometimes good can come from even the darkest circumstances." He glanced toward the back of the courtroom, where Ethan Blackwood stood leaning on a cane, still recovering from his wounds but improving daily. "Judge Larkin tells me the railroad has confirmed they'll be using the route through Wheeler's property. The water rights alone make it valuable, but with a railroad spur, that land will be worth 10 times what it is now." "I'm not sure I care about that," Abigail said honestly. "Maybe not," Wallace acknowledged, "but it does give you options. Whatever you decide to do next, you'll have the means to do it properly." As the crowd dispersed, Ethan made his way slowly toward her. He was still pale, still moved with obvious pain, but there was a quiet strength in his bearing that Abigail had come to admire deeply. "Congratulations," he said simply. "Thomas would be pleased with how things have turned out." "Would he?" Abigail asked. "I sometimes wonder what he would think of all this. He chose you for a reason, Abigail. I think he saw in you the same courage and determination that I've seen these past weeks." Ethan hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Redfeather asked me to invite you to dinner tonight, to celebrate the verdict." "I'd like that," Abigail said with a smile, "if you're feeling well enough for company. For you. Always." The warmth in his eyes sent a flutter through her heart. As they left the courthouse together, Abigail realized that in the midst of danger and loss, something unexpected had blossomed, a connection she had never anticipated when she first stepped off the stagecoach in Copper Ridge. The town spread out before them, no longer a place of fear and danger, but a community beginning to emerge from the shadow of Burke's corruption. Thomas Wheeler's ranch waited for her decision, a legacy she had never sought, but now was hers to determine. And beside her walked Ethan Blackwood, a man whose courage and honor had saved her life, whose quiet strength had become her anchor in a storm of uncertainty. What future would she choose? The ranch, with its promise of prosperity? A return to the East, to the familiar comforts of her former life? Or something entirely new, a path she was only beginning to envision? Abigail didn't yet know the answer, but as Ethan offered his arm, and she took it, stepping forward into the bright autumn sunshine, she felt something she hadn't experienced since arriving in Arizona territory. Hope. Not just for justice served or wrongs righted, but for possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Whatever path she chose, she would walk it with the courage she had discovered within herself. Courage born in danger, tempered by loss, and now ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The autumn days grew shorter as Copper Ridge slowly returned to normal after the sensational trial. Calvin Burke's bank was temporarily closed, then reopened under the management of a stern-faced man from Prescott who promised fair dealings for all customers. Farley Jenkins's cattle operation was sold at auction, the proceeds divided among those who could prove he had cheated them over the years. For Abigail, the conclusion of the trial brought not closure but a crossroads. With Thomas's killers brought to justice and her ownership of the Wheeler Ranch legally secured, she now faced the decision she had been postponing. What to do with her unexpected inheritance, and more importantly, what to do with her life. 3 weeks after the verdict, Abigail found herself once again at Thomas's ranch, this time not as a fugitive, but as its rightful owner. The property had been neglected since his death, but even in its current state, she could see why Thomas had been so proud of it. The house was solid and well-built, with ample rooms and thoughtful touches that spoke of a man who had planned for a family. The land surrounding it was fertile, with plentiful water from the creek and good grazing for cattle. As she stood on the porch, looking out over what was now her land, she heard the approach of a horse. Turning, she saw Ethan riding toward the house, no longer needing a cane but still moving with the careful deliberation of a man not fully healed. "I thought I might find you here," he said as he dismounted. "Mrs. Larson said you'd left town early this morning." "I needed to see it again," Abigail explained. "Properly this time, not running for my life or collecting evidence." Ethan nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. "And what do you think of your ranch, Miss Montgomery?" "It's beautiful," she admitted. "Thomas built something remarkable here. I can see why he loved it." She hesitated, then added, "But I don't know if I'm the right person to continue what he started." "Why not? You've proven yourself more than capable of facing the challenges of this territory. Surviving danger and running a cattle ranch are very different things," Abigail pointed out. "I was a schoolteacher in Boston, Ethan. What do I know? About raising cattle or managing land? You could learn," he suggested, "or hire someone to manage it for you." Abigail sighed, turning back to the view. "I've received 2 offers to buy the property already, one from a cattle company in Denver, the other from the railroad itself. Both offer far more than I ever imagined it could be worth." "Because of the water rights and the railroad spur," Ethan nodded. "It's prime land, made more valuable by everything that's happened. Judge Larkin says I could sell and return to Boston a wealthy woman. I could re-establish myself there, perhaps open my own school." She glanced at him. "It would be the sensible choice. Is that what you want, to return to Boston?" The question hung in the air between them. In truth, Abigail had been asking herself the same thing for days, with no clear answer forthcoming. 3 weeks ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. She admitted, "All I wanted was to escape this place and the painful memories it held. But now—" She trailed off, uncertain how to express the complicated emotions that had taken root in her heart. "Now?" Ethan prompted gently. "Now I find myself reluctant to leave," she said softly. "Despite everything that's happened, Or perhaps because of it, I feel connected to this place in ways I never expected. A small smile touched Ethan's lips. The territory has a way of getting under your skin. My mother used to say the same thing. She came west intending to stay just long enough to visit her brother in Tucson, but once she met my father and saw the beauty of this land, she never wanted to leave. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. I received a letter yesterday, Abigail said eventually, from the school board in Copper Ridge. They're looking for a teacher for the town's children. Apparently the previous schoolmaster left rather abruptly after the trial. He was Burke's cousin, Ethan explained. Probably thought it wise to make himself scarce once Burke was convicted. They've offered me the position, Abigail continued. It's modest pay, but with the income from the ranch I could live quite comfortably. You're considering it? There was a note of hope in Ethan's voice that sent a flutter through Abigail's heart. I am, she admitted. I enjoyed teaching in Boston. The children here deserve a good education as much as any in the East. They do, Ethan agreed, and you'd be excellent at it. Another silence fell between them, this one charged with unspoken thoughts and feelings that had been building since their harrowing escape through the wilderness. There's something else, Abigail said finally, gathering her courage. Something that's been influencing my decision whether to stay or go. Ethan looked at her questioningly, waiting. You, she said simply. My feelings for you have become important to me. More important than I expected when we first met. A flash of emotion crossed Ethan's face. Surprise, followed quickly by a warmth that reached his eyes. Abigail, please, she interrupted. Let me finish before I lose my nerve. I know that I came here to marry Thomas. I know that any feelings I have for you might seem improper, given the circumstances. And I know that your life is established here at your ranch, with Mrs. Redfeather and your hands depending on you. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. Are you saying you'll stay in Copper Ridge? I'm saying I'm considering it, she clarified, and that you're a significant part of that consideration. Then consider this as well, Ethan said softly. He reached for her hand, holding it gently in his larger one. I've spent most of my life alone, caught between two worlds and belonging fully to neither. The Apache side of me was too foreign. For the white settlers, the white side of me was viewed with suspicion by the full-blooded Apache. Until Thomas Wheeler came along, I had few people I could truly call friends. Thomas saw the man you are, not your heritage, Abigail said. Yes, and so do you. Ethan's thumb traced a gentle pattern on her palm. From the moment we met, you've looked at me, really looked at me, without the prejudice I've come to expect. Even when you had every reason to distrust me, you saw past appearances to be the truth. You saved my life, Abigail reminded him, multiple times. And you saved mine, he countered. Not just from Jenkins' bullets, but in ways you might not even realize. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for something difficult. What I'm trying to say, Abigail, is that my feelings for you have become important to me as well. Important enough that I would ask you to consider one more option for your future. Abigail's heart raced as she waited for him to continue. Wheeler's ranch and mine share a boundary, Ethan said. The creek that makes this land so valuable runs through both properties. Together, they would make one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. Together, Abigail repeated, understanding beginning to dawn. Yes, together, the ranches and us. Ethan's gaze was steady, though she could see it cost him something to be so vulnerable. I'm not asking for an immediate answer. I know you came here expecting to marry one man, and it would be presumptuous of me to think you could so quickly consider another. But if you decide to stay in Copper Ridge, I would like the opportunity to court you properly, to see if what we've begun to feel for each other might grow into something lasting. Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes, not of sadness, but of a complicated happiness she hadn't thought possible just days ago. "Ethan Blackwood, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," he said with a small smile. "When I propose, you'll know it. For now, I'm simply asking if you might be open to the possibility someday." The future stretched before Abigail like the vast Arizona landscape, beautiful, challenging, full of unexpected possibilities. She had come west seeking one life and found another, one she could never have imagined. "I would be open to that possibility," she said softly. "Very open." The smile that broke across Ethan's face was like sunrise over the mountains, warm, bright, full of promise. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I have something to look forward to," he said, "and a very good reason to finish healing properly." As if drawn by a force beyond herself, Abigail stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest lightly on his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "May I?" she whispered, looking up at him. In answer, Ethan lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. Abigail had dreamed of her first kiss with Thomas, imagined it would be pleasant and proper. This was something else entirely, a connection that sent warmth flooding through her, a rightness she felt in her very soul. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I believe Thomas would approve," he said quietly. "He wanted your happiness above all." "I think so too," Abigail agreed. The gold band Thomas had left her seemed to warm slightly against her skin, where she wore it on a chain around her neck, not as a symbol of what might have been, but as a reminder of the man whose final act had been to protect her, to provide for her future. 2 months later, on a crisp December morning, Abigail stood before 20 eager faces in the newly renovated Copper Ridge schoolhouse. Children from ages 5 to 15 filled the benches, their expressions ranging from excited to wary as they assessed their new teacher. "Good morning, children," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Miss Montgomery, and I'm very pleased to be your new teacher." A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. "Miss Montgomery, is it true you shot at outlaws and helped catch the men who killed Mr. Wheeler?" Abigail suppressed a smile. Of course the children would have heard the story, probably embellished with each telling. "I did help bring some dangerous men to justice," she acknowledged. "But today we're going to talk about something equally exciting, the power of knowledge. With education, each of you can grow up to change your world in important ways." As she began her first lesson, Abigail felt a certainty that had been missing since her arrival in Arizona territory. This was where she belonged, not just in the schoolhouse, but in Copper Ridge itself. The town was changing, growing, healing from Burke's corrupt influence. New families were arriving, drawn by the coming railroad and the promise of opportunity. And, after school hours, she was learning the business of ranching. With the help of a capable foreman recommended by Marshal Wallace, Wheeler's Ranch, now officially registered as the Montgomery Ranch, was once again operational. She had decided not to sell, not when the land represented both Thomas's legacy and her own future. 3 evenings a week, Ethan came to call, their courtship proceeding at a pace that raised some eyebrows in town, but felt right to them both. They had faced death together. They had earned the right to determine their own timeline for love. On Sundays, Abigail often rode out to the cemetery on the hill, overlooking the town. There, at Thomas's grave, she would talk to him, telling him about the ranch, the school, the changes coming to Copper Ridge. She didn't know if he could hear her, but the ritual brought her peace. "You would be proud of how things have turned out," she told him on one such visit, placing fresh winter flowers on his grave. "The ranch is thriving, and the railroad has officially announced its route through the property. Judge Larkin says the value has nearly tripled already." A cold breeze rustled the dried grasses around the cemetery, carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. "Ethan has been a true friend," she continued. "More than a friend, if I'm honest. I think you knew that might happen when you asked him to protect me. You chose well, Thomas. He's a good man." She adjusted her shawl against the chill, her thoughts turning to the future. "I've decided to use some of the ranch profits to establish a scholarship fund for children who want to continue their education beyond what our little school can provide. Your legacy will help shape the next generation of Copper Ridge." As she prepared to leave, Abigail touched the headstone one last time. "Thank you for bringing me west, Thomas. It wasn't the life we planned together, but it has become a life I cherish nonetheless." Riding back toward town, Abigail could see the changes already taking place. Construction had begun on the railroad station at the edge of town. New buildings were going up along Main Street. The territorial governor had appointed a reform-minded official to replace Sheriff Davis, who had resigned in the wake of the Burke scandal, and riding toward her from the direction of the Montgomery Ranch was a familiar figure on a black horse. Ethan raised his hand in greeting as they approached each other. "I thought I might find you here," he said, falling beside her. "Your Sunday ritual." She nodded. "It helps, somehow, to tell him about the things happening in town at the ranch." "He would be pleased to know you're happy," Ethan said. "That was all he ever wanted for you. It's why he wrote to me before he died." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the winter sun casting long shadows across the land. "Christmas is coming," Ethan remarked eventually. "The children at school are already talking about the town celebration." "They're very excited," Abigail agreed, "especially since Marshal Wallace promised to return for the festivities. He's something of a hero to them now." "To all of us," Ethan said. "Without him, Burke might have escaped justice." As they approached the edge of town, Ethan guided his horse closer to hers. "I was hoping you might join me for Christmas dinner. At the ranch, Mrs. Redfeather has already started planning the menu. She's quite taken with you, you know." "Is she?" Abigail asked, surprised. The older woman had warmed to her considerably in recent weeks, but still maintained a certain reserve. "She told me yesterday that you have a good spirit, strong enough to match your own," Ethan said with a smile. "High praise from her." "Then I would be honored to join you for Christmas dinner," Abigail replied. "Should I bring anything?" Ethan's expression grew serious. "Just yourself, and perhaps an answer to a question I've been wanting to ask you." Abigail's heart quickened. "What question is that?" Instead of replying, Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the sunlight. A ring, simple but beautiful, a band of silver set with a small turquoise stone. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "My father had it. Made for her by a Navajo silversmith when they were married. I've kept it all these years, waiting for you, though I didn't know it then." Abigail's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, I promised to court you properly," he continued, "and I intend to honor that promise for as long as you wish. But I also want you to know that my intentions are serious. When you're ready, if you're ready, this belongs to you." He returned the ring to his pocket, not pressing her for an immediate response. It was one of the things Abigail had come to love about him, his patience, his respect for her need to move at her own pace. "Thank you for showing me," she said softly. "It's beautiful." "Like its future owner," Ethan replied, his dark eyes warm with affection. As they rode into town side by side, Abigail felt a profound sense of rightness. She had traveled west seeking a husband and found instead a community, a purpose, and eventually a love born not of letters and distant dreams, but of shared danger, mutual respect, and genuine understanding. Thomas Wheeler had brought her to Arizona territory with the promise of a new life. Though not in the way either of them had imagined, that promise had been fulfilled. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find her groom dead had found something she never expected, not just protection from a half-Apache rancher, but a home where she truly belonged, a future bright with possibility, and a love that had been forged in the crucible of danger and emerged stronger for it. The winter sun cast their shadows long across the ground, two silhouettes riding side by side, their paths now intertwined by choice rather than circumstance. Ahead lay Copper Ridge, a town being reborn. Behind them stretched the vast beauty of the Arizona wilderness, and between them grew a bond that neither danger nor death had been able to sever, a love as enduring as the mountains themselves, and a future they would build together, one day at a time. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.